Welcome back to She Shield Season 2. This next episode is with Melody Lauer. She is part of the Citizens Defense Research, and she also started a course back in the day called Baby Wearing and Caring, and now teaches the armed parent guardian. Melody is an incredible woman in this space. She's done so much to transcend the instruction and education around a parent wanting to also conceal carry and be a protector. I've gotten a lot of questions from followers about, how do I conceal carry when I'm pregnant, postpartum, once I have children? How does this apply to my spouse? How do we train as parents? There's so many questions like that. Personally, I can't really answer, so I hit Melody with all of those today. So stay tuned if that interests you. This is a great one. If you want the video version of this, check out the She Shield YouTube channel. It is She Shield Podcast. And then, guys, I started a concealment community. I'm really excited about this. It is literally called The Concealment Community, hosted under my professional Facebook page, Sofia Espina. That's where you'll find me. This group is for anyone wanting a little bit closer connection in the community to talk about concealed carry methods, ask questions, and then I'll be going live on there as well. I hope to see you all over there. In the meantime, let's jump in with Melody. Yeah, my biggest thing, speaking of like DMs and everything, my biggest thing has been lately I posted or yesterday a video for running safety tools I carry with myself when I'm running. And
Oh, yeah, I think I saw that video.
okay, so you know what I'm talking about. All the comments from dudes that were obviously unwanted included, first of all, like, where do you live? Like, Middle East,
Oh.
and then get a treadmill or go to the gym and don't
Hmm?
go running outside. And it's like, that is the craziest thing to tell a woman, you know what I mean? Like, it's
Oh,
insane.
yeah.
So I just filmed a YouTube video to go into more depth on that before this. But yeah, those are about the craziest comments I get.
It's like, "Excuse me, could you conform your life to the idea of what I think your life should
Right.
be?"
Exactly.
No, thank you.
Yes, and also so my I think I mentioned my sister responds to those comments, and I finally wrote her because she was being so just level-headed and, like, communicating my intention of the video, and I wrote her I wrote her today and I was like, "Just block them." Like, first of all, they're probably the dudes that are running down women, first of all, and 2, like, they're not
Mhm.
our ideal audience, and they don't need to know what women are carrying because then they don't need to have that, like, upper
Yeah.
hand. So
Yes.
anyway, thank you so much for coming on, Melody. This is awesome. I hope we're not, like, just jumping into the episode too soon, but it always happens that I'll
Let's
have
go
a
for it.
right, I'll have a guest speaker on, and we'll talk about so many amazing things, and then I'll be like, "Alright, now we're gonna start recording," and, a name we wanted to have you on, I had a close, friend of mine who's also my accountant, she's awesome, who's pregnant, and she concealed carries, steadily, and her lifestyle's changed, and she was like, "How should I adapt to this?" And, I'm sitting over here, 28, single, or I guess I have a boyfriend, but I don't have kids, and, as much as I can talk to her about methods of concealment, it's one of those things, it's a niche topic that you have so much experience in, not only just pregnancy, but postpartum, caring when you have a little kid around, like, those are just things and topics I haven't experienced personally. So I appreciate you coming on today because you've just made such a difference in the gun community, by teaching women these concepts and making sure people are well informed. So thank you for being here.
Oh, well, thank you, those were high all those things were high praise, so I appreciate it. And, I mean, that question, like, I haven't been pregnant for a while.
Right.
My oldest is 17,
I didn't
and
mean
my
to make it sound
youngest
like that.
now is 12. No, no,
You've been
but
pregnant a
I
lot.
think
What is it?
I didn't pregnant a lot, so much, oh my word. No, I didn't take it that way either. But I wanted to preface it by saying that, I've been a firearms instructor now for, going on 18 years, and my oldest is 17. So if you do the math, that means I became a firearms instructor before I even got pregnant with my first child. So, and there was not a lot of information back then, and there isn't there's better information now, and information is definitely more accessible than it was when I first started. But there has not been leaps and bounds as far as really good information about pregnancy, carrying, shooting, all that stuff, because it's still kind of a taboo topic. Like what you were saying, we get all these guys that are giving you unsolicited opinions about what you should be doing with your life. It is way more so when you are pregnant, and it comes from both women, and it comes from men, and it comes from the medical community as well.
Mm,
Because if there's one area wherein, medicine is very, very delicate, it is when it comes to pregnancy and pregnant women, because everyone has I guess, the thought process of why risk it, right? Which on to some degree, completely understandable, right?
sure.
On the other hand, you still have to live your life, right? And if your life includes a firearm, then, you're gonna have to learn how to get around some of those issues. So, I guess, like, where do you wanna start? Do you
Right.
wanna start with pregnancy? Do you want, like, because this is a broad topic.
Absolutely. And another, just before we jump into that, which I think we should honestly start with like a spectrum. Like, how does concealed carry change with being pregnant to postpartum? And the first thing that comes to mind when I was a personal trainer, I had a client who had inquired about concealed carry to me. She followed my page and she kind of knew I was into that. And she said she was concerned because her lower abdomen was so sensitive postpartum, and I had no idea that was the thing. So I didn't know to recommend what I call hybrid carry, which is fanny pack. It's not quite a shoulder bag and it's not IWB, so I call it hybrid. And at the time, I wasn't even carrying hybrid. I don't even think I stood for it. I think I was a Filster Enigma and a Glock 19, or you're wrong. Like, I think I was kind of still in that
Yeah,
place in my life, unfortunately. But I remember being like, oh no, like, I don't have anything to give you. So that's just kind of a little preface to why this episode is going to be so amazing. But how do you feel about starting almost on the spectrum of like being so pregnant that maybe inside the waistband, appendix isn't comfortable anymore, all the way to
yeah,
having a little bit one running around? Would you be okay with kind of addressing it like that?
absolutely.
Okay.
I think we can actually even go back a little bit
Ooh,
further,
okay.
because before you even know that you're pregnant, and I think it's a good place to start, even if you're trying to conceive or you don't know, right? Obviously, if you're trying to conceive, you're very aware that you are trying to get pregnant. You're very aware that might happen, and really the things that you in that stage that. And I think everyone who is of childbearing age who might get pregnant, I think it's worthwhile to understand things like lead exposure, shooting, that kind of thing, because there's basically 3 primary ways that lead gets into a human body. You either ingest it by eating it with your food because you haven't washed your hands, or through lead-based paint, and you're a child and you're chewing on toys that have been painted it. You breathe it in, lead is in the air. This is the most common thing that happens to those of us who are shooters, particularly in indoor ranges. Lead is in the air, you're breathing it in. And then last is through, physical contact being left on your skin through powders and stuff that are left on your skin for too long. If you are trying to conceive, or if you think you may be pregnant, or you're just at that age, I think you don't have to go out of your way to be insane about it. But I think, making sure that you are washing your hands on a regular basis, fully and completely showering before when you get home from the range, being very careful to not eat or drink specifically on an indoor range. Those things are going to go the farthest to minimizing your lead exposure, and then any complications that could possibly arise from that. And the data is not great, because we do have data on lead poisoning, like higher doses of lead poisoning, in sheep. We have it in other, in humans, in industrial, circumstances, like prior to our understanding of how lead impacted people, but like minute levels over extended periods of time, we don't have great data on, at least not that I have found. If somebody else has that data, would love to see it. But it's one of those things that we just talked about, like, why risk it, right?
Right.
Be mindful. And that's just good hygiene. That's good range hygiene for anybody, whether you're trying to conceive or not. But I think it's important to remember that once you get pregnant, that little baby is now developing, and lead can absolutely inhibit a developing fetus. So it is a little bit more like the lead levels that we as adults can tolerate while we're fully, completely, you know, um, developed are different than a developing fetus, of course.
Right.
So that would be kind of like step number one, right?
Fantastic. I'm
Um,
so glad you brought that up, by
yeah,
the way. I didn't even
good range hygiene.
Yes, absolutely. I used to be so good. I had this laundry detergent that I would wash all my clothes with. I used to have a brush. I say this like I don't ever wash my hands. I do. But I mostly just use
I
wipes
used to do
now.
this, not
Right?
so much
Not so
anymore.
much anymore. And it just had to do with like I moved homes. Like I moved from Arkansas to Utah and then I got out of my routine and I left my de-letting detergent at my mom's house and like I kind of just ran out of my routine. But I'm so glad you mentioned this. And I see this all the time. I have friends that in the community that get pregnant and they either get a lot of hate or even their kind of product brand sponsors in the industry won't allow them to shoot with their products or brands while they're pregnant. So this is very much something that needs to be addressed. I appreciate you starting there.
Well, and it's one of those things again, like we said, there's not a ton of data out there. And believe you me, I did look. And there's a lot of assumptions that are made and thrown out there. And when I tried to really, really, really dig deep into the data and what does science actually say, it got murkier and murkier and murkier. And even the experts I tried to reach out to didn't want to give professional opinions because if they say something like, "Oh yeah, I think that's safe," and then somebody has an issue, so they're always going to default to the side of caution and extreme caution when it comes to lead exposure and pregnancy. And like I said, to some degree, I completely that makes complete sense.
Right.
That being said, I did shoot to limited degree with all three of my pregnancy, and I am an N of one. I am an anecdote, and I understand that, but all three of them are healthy and kind of normal, mostly normal and have tested perfectly normal as far as their lead levels. I did have all of my children tested for lead more often, because I am a shooter, and I wanted to make sure that they weren't being exposed, to a degree that, was harmful to them, and as well as their hearing. I have all 3 of my children had their hearing tested, and
Fantastic.
all of their hearing is normal as well.
Oh wow.
So, like I said, I'm an N of 1, I'm an
Mhm.
anecdote, but, and I did shoot to a limited degree. So, but when it comes to carrying, kinda getting back into the carrying, we can kinda segue back to
Sure.
shooting in pregnancy. Um, during those first couple of weeks when you just found out, nothing really has changed very much physically. Now, you might not be feeling great. You might be having, morning sickness, you might be having tenderness, you might be having some bloating. You might not even know that it's associated with pregnancy yet. And you're just like, "Oh, I just feel off," or "I feel, not so great." And if I would say the same thing even if you weren't carrying or even if you weren't pregnant. If you're not feeling good, do what makes you feel comfortable. One of the things that I really get ticked off about the gun industry at large is the one of the sayings is a gun is meant to be comforting, not comfortable. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that if we're gonna be incorporating something into our daily life, if there is 0 comfort to it and we can't make it comfortable, the likelihood that we're gonna stick to that is gonna start to plummet.
Right.
So, if you have a way to keep I love hybrid carry. I really do, and I wish there were better options for it back when I was pregnant
Right.
because I think and I love that the way you say it, like hybrid carry. It's on body, it's secure, at the same time, it's not in a purse, it's not in something that you're just gonna throw down when you come in the door. It's designated for a firearm. I think something like that is a great option if you're just like, "I'm running out to the store, I don't feel great, but I still wanna have a firearm with me." Or I'm feeling really bloated, I feel just awful.
Yeah.
That's a great option. It's a great option that keeps those things around your waistband, kind of off that waistband area as things are moving and changing down there.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When it comes to off body bags, just like while we're or hybrid carry bags, sorry, just while we're on the topic, what did they have when you were pregnant? Like what was accessible to you? I'm just curious.
So, one of the big ones, yeah, there was a lot of, and they're still out there for sure. Belly band was extremely popular. Everywhere you went, everyone recommended the belly band, the belly band, the belly band. We understand that there's a lot of issues, and
Yeah.
there's different types of belly bands for sure. And basically, it was just basically a big elastic band that went around your midsection and had a pocket for a firearm. The biggest issue with a lot of those was that the pocket was soft-sided and you could, if you were in an environment where things were a little bit more or just any environment,
Sure.
you can actually press the trigger through the fabric, and that obviously is a huge safety risk.
Right.
So Not a great, and they just weren't as secure either, especially the larger the firearm you went. So belly bands were very popular. There were a couple people, like niche holster makers, that were making things that are fairly comparable to the Enigma these days, but they were one off, very kind of, you had to kind of know them and you had to give them measurements. And so that was not as prevalent and not as accessible as like the Enigma is today.
Right.
Shoulder holster. I come from the day and age where, like, Miami Vice and the
Ah.
shoulder holster was still, like, y you if you had a shoulder holster, you were
Yeah.
it was
Okay.
it was
How
a
cool.
cool thing, and in my 3rd trimester, with almost all of my kids, a J-frame and a shoulder holster is phenomenal,
Yeah.
like a Gelco, Miami
There
Classic.
you go.
Yep, I have one,
Yeah.
they're great, so it is an option if you wanna go that route.
Would that be open
So
carry?
yeah, there were Oh, no,
It
like,
was.
shoulder holster, you just put a sweatshirt on over top of
Oh,
it, and,
nice.
yeah, or a open front shirt or something
Right.
like that. Yeah, just very, very classic 1980s movies
Yeah.
style, shoulder holster, so
Absolutely.
yeah, those were very popular.
They look super cool. My dad has a brown leather one for his, I think it was like a Gen 2 Glock 19, and I wore it for, like, a
Yeah.
little photo shoot when I started this industry because that was the only access I had to, like, a holster like that, and I didn't wanna buy, like, nowadays, the good ones, like, the good leather ones are 150 or so. I put it on with, like, a sweater dress. Anyway, I think they look so cool. I even saw this girl the other day, I thought she was open carrying with a shoulder holster, but the instead of, like, a gun holster, it was a holster for her, like, cards. It was a wallet. So she had, like, a wallet on one side, and the other side was, like, holding
Oh.
her lipstick, and I was like, "Whoa." Definitely thought she had a gun.
I saw someone with, like, a shoulder thing for a camera,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
really thought it was for a
Yes,
gun, and I
yes.
actually did. I was like, "Can I ask what that's for?"
Right.
And she's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm a photographer, it's for my camera," and I'm like, "Okay,
Nice.
alright,
That's
that
so
makes sense.
cool.
Great."
Yeah, absolutely. I know what you're talking about. I've also clocked those before. Yeah, when you're kind of in that mindset and you're looking around for people like that, it's easy to kind of draw to that conclusion a little bit. Totally
But it's
fair.
nice to know that there's other reasonable
Yes.
explanations out there for them, that it doesn't automatically, to non-gun people, it doesn't automatically scream gun.
Yes.
So
Absolutely. And I like that you mentioned, like, if you're not feeling well, the bloated thing. That's real for people who even aren't pregnant. I There's this pizza place my guy and I love to go to in Salt Lake, and anytime we go, I hybrid carry, and, like, I do not wanna feel that gun pressing up against my pizza belly, like, no thanks, so, I just transfer it to my hips, I never take it off of me, it's always just strapped around my hips, and that's how I do that, and I don't have to worry about it. I just put it back across the chest when I leave the restaurant, and it's great. Yeah, so that's so good to know. Um, and when it comes to lead exposure, just kinda while we're getting into, those later stages, what can someone do to train? Like, dry fire is the first thing that comes to mind for me, but what are some things they could do to keep up their training in that time, especially with potentially new modalities of carrying?
Oh, for sure. And I think the you mentioning new modalities of training, that is really important, because one of the things I think, more so for women in general, and not just because we get pregnant, but because we have different modes of dress, we have different environments that we go in traditionally than men do, and we don't wear the same uniform, right? And by uniform, I mean the vast majority of guys out there are gonna have shirt and pants
Right.
of some sort, right? Whereas we can have longer shirts, we can have more flowy shirts, we can have high-rise jeans, low-rise skirts, dresses, all that kind, our variety of clothing, and then the uniforms that we wear are way more vast than a man's. And because of that, it's much more likely that you as a woman are going to end up with far more different modes of carry than a man will. Like, I just listed a few myself. I have purse carried,
Yeah.
I have hybrid carried, I have belly band carried, I have thigh holster carried, I have bra carried, I have shoulder, I think I already said shoulder holster. I have ankle carried. I have, if you could mention it, I probably tried it at some point in time. But with each and every one of those different modalities of carry comes a need truly to figure out or take training how to do it correctly and how to do it safely, particularly on the draw stroke. Because a lot of these that you'll just, people will put them on and they'll just be like, oh yeah, all you have to do is pull it out. And they don't realize that they are sweeping very important things. And there are ways to do it safely. That's the
Right.
thing. Some people are like, well, there's just no way to do this safely. That's not necessarily true. You might have to change things. You might have to move, position your body in a certain way before you start the draw stroke. Now, each and every one of those things is going to probably trade off in time, though. And so, but until you have either had the training or you've really put some time in to figure that out, those aren't going to be obvious to you. And in those moments, and that's you figure all of that out in either training or in dry fire practice. You really do. And but it's one of those things where unless you're kind of to a level where you understand the rules and you understand what you're controlling for, like safe angles and all that kind of stuff, I recommend at least having an instructor watch you or sending a video to them so that they can point out things that maybe you might be going, oh yeah, this is fine, I figured it all out. But then a firearms instructor might be able to look at you and go, "Did you realize that every time you do that, sweep your own brachial artery?" Or, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even notice that." So it's something that I think, should be done uh, ideally under the training of a qualified instructor, but at least under the eye of a qualified instructor. Um, but yeah, those things can be done. And draw strokes are the easiest thing to do in dry fire practice because you don't even have to do a trigger press,
Mhm.
Now, if you're using a real firearm, of course, all the rules of dry fire practice do apply. But if you invest in a dummy gun of the make and model that you are using, you can practice drawing to your heart's content anywhere. You can be in your bedroom and practicing it there. You can be in your basement and practice there. There's no limit if you're using a dummy gun. That's why every single firearm that I have a dummy gun for, so that I can do these kinds of things, especially when you're talking about incorporating later on if you want to, and I think that you should, if you have children and you want to practice draw strokes around your children and see how they're going to respond and that kind of stuff. Do not do that with a live gun, even if you've taken all the dry fire precautions that are reasonable. I strongly recommend doing that with a blue gun or blue gun equivalent.
So you're saying if there are children, like, in the home, is that your point or just in general?
Well, so we're kind of skipping ahead,
Yes, for
but
sure.
I have incorporated my children into my draw stroke, like my live children
Uh-huh.
with me,
Yeah.
especially when I was like holding them in my arms. Like, because it's one thing to hold, like, a backpack or a bag or something that's weighted to the weight of your child. I think that's kind of like a crawl, walk, run, right?
Okay.
Like, okay, I'm holding something that is about the equivalence of my child. What does that even feel like? What is it like to draw? But one thing that we don't do a good job of recognizing when it comes to using a firearm around loved ones, around children, is that they're still human beings and they have a will of their own and they can still interact with you and their environment, and you will not know what they're going to do unless, and even if you do practice with them, you're still not going to know 100% what they're going to do. But it wasn't until I started incorporating my children into some of those practices that I realized there are times that I would go to, like, let my child go and he'd just hang on to me. And I'm like trying to incorporate a draw stroke while he's hanging onto my arm, or he's,
Mm.
his leg is over top of my shirt. I'm like, okay, now I have to defeat not just my
Your
cover garment,
garment.
but I also have to defeat my child's leg.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
so and I would not have known that had I not incorporated my child into my practice, but the only way to do that safely is with a complete dummy gun. I would not do that with a dry fire and clear gun.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I had not thought about that at all. That's so yes, that's something I've just never considered because I haven't been there.
Come to Tap G. We'll
Yes,
talk all about it.
absolutely, absolutely. I
And for those of you who don't know,
yes.
Tap G is the Armed Parent slash Guardian, which is our flagship course. So
I was about to say this is a good time for you to kind of share about those courses, for those curious, and then we can get back to kind of talking about, the kind of the continuum of pregnancy and having kids around. Yeah, for those listening, how can they train with you? What can they expect? What options do you have?
sure, and it's kind of funny that we're kind of talking about all of this because
Yeah.
this really is what led me into what I'm doing now. Is I got pregnant, I had a child, and I remember going to the range after I had my oldest, and I was like, "Well, what do I do now that I have a kid?" You know, because he's in the little carrier, and I
Mhm.
was like, I'm probably going to end up shooting more one handed." And I realized that I didn't have as good of recoil control with my 45. Yes, I was carrying 45 at the time
Whoa.
as I did with a 9 millimeter. So I was like, maybe I need to change my gear a little bit. And then I just kept asking more questions like, well, what if this happens? And what if
Mhm.
that happens? And I started really seeking out that information regarding being a parent and also being a gun owner and somebody who carries and somebody who trains. Um, and there were 2 things that kind of happened that really actually 3 that kind of happened that really kicked it into high gear. One, Greg Ellifritz wrote an article based and it was just observations. He wasn't trying to answer any questions, but he had done a force on force where they had a child actor, I think he said he was about 8 or 9 years old, who was supposed to be acting as the child of the person who was in the scenario, right? And he just noted how many times, like, how were people interacting with this child? How was the bad guy interacting with the child? And then what was the outcomes, right? And he just simply observed that the vast majority of people in these scenarios would collect the child to them in order to defend the child, right? By either putting them behind him or just collecting them to their person. And which resulted in both them and the child being shot a lot. And he just put that observation out there. And he was just like, this is what I observed. Don't know what to do with it, but this is what I observed.
Interesting.
And I was like, wow, that would have been my instinct, right? Like
Absolutely.
collect my child to me. And then I also very shortly thereafter I went to the tactical conference, the Rangemaster Tactical Conference, and Craig Douglas, who I know you know and have been to several of his courses. He was conducting what he did for many years, which is the experiential learning laboratory, which basically you went into a scenario completely blind. He would give you like a task, right? He'd be like, okay, your job when you get in this room is to, your car is going to be over here. Your job is to get in your car and go home, right? And you would enter a room completely blind and you just have to deal with things as they came up, right? And, I won't go into detail about this scenario because that's irrelevant, but there was a baby in this scenario, which I ended up taking responsibility for. I ended up shooting what essentially was the mother of the child, and, the term "full ISO baby" became a thing because at the end, I was in a full isometric stance with the baby, like, balanced
Oh
in
my
between my
gosh. Oh my
arms.
gosh. Yeah.
And, yeah, and I left that scenario feeling
Oh,
awful,
I bet.
absolutely
Yeah.
awful. Even though the child did not get shot in my
Sure.
scenario, once you've done an ELL and you can go back and watch other people do it as well. And I was just observing how many times the child got shot, how many times everybody got shot. And it really was just like, "Oh, this is awful." Like, having a baby in the presence of this kind of an encounter is a terrible, terrible outcome, and there's not a great way to handle it, and, like, how do we handle these situations? Because at that time, I now had 2 children.
Mm.
Um, so then the 3rd thing that happened was, I'm not sure if you remember it, but I believe it was in Washington, a woman who was trained, she had her CCW, she was taking additional training. Her husband had gotten her a concealed carry purse for
Yeah.
Christmas, and the day after Christmas, she was taking it out for the first time. Her 2-year-old got into her bag, got access to her firearm, and shot and killed her. And her child was the same age my child was at the same time, and she was the same age I
Oh
was.
my gosh.
And
Wow.
I was I was just I was furious, but I was also like, "How could this happen?" Right?
Right. Yeah.
And I remember calling Kathy Jackson, which I'm not sure if you're familiar who Kathy Jackson is.
Absolutely. Her article, it's the dancing bear, right?
Yep,
Yeah, that, like,
yep, yep.
changed my life. Yeah, of course.
That a great, 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 great,
Yeah.
just woman, very intelligent. And I remember calling her and I was just ranting at her. And she just started asking me questions. Just, well, Melody, why do you think this wouldn't happen to you? And I was like, well, exactly my point. Like, none of us are above it, and I was just ranting at
Right.
her. And she just kept asking me these questions.
Mhm.
And towards the end of that conversation, I went, Kathy, there should be a class. There should be a class for parents that addresses all of this stuff. And she goes, well, Melody, if not you, then who?
Right. Oh my
And I was
goodness.
like, what?
Yeah.
And she's like, I've been grilling you for the last an hour and a half about, all of this stuff. And she's like, you've had an answer for every question that I've asked you. And she said, all of this information that you are sharing with me is the exact kind of information that you would have wanted when you got pregnant for the first time. And she's like, I think you should be the one to answer this question. So I started at the same time I was working both at a parenting center and at a gun store.
Wow.
So I worked both
Yeah,
places. So
yes.
I was very, very deep into baby wearing, into attachment style parenting, into, I was taking classes on nursing and all of these things in the morning, and then in the afternoon I'd work in the gun store.
Wow, yes.
Um, so I have this very hybrid experience, and these worlds were very separate, but it meant that I was living both lives very simultaneously, and learning how to incorporate all of those things into what I was doing, as well as training and taking classes and teaching classes
Right.
and things along those lines.
Wow. Yeah.
So I started the class baby wearing and carrying, which was just how do you safely practice attachment style parenting with baby wearing and all that stuff while carrying a gun.
Could you define
And
attachment style like,
sure.
parenting?
So attachment style parenting is the theory that the more love and attachment that you can give to a child, the better that they will develop, and they will develop secure attachments to their caregivers
Okay.
and have a better outcome. And you do that by being responsive to their when they cry. It's not a big proponent of like cry me out, that or crying out. I'm saying
Therapy?
that wrong.
Yes,
You know
I
what
know
I'm
what you're
trying to
talking
say.
about. You let the baby
Um,
cry until they stop.
yeah, where you just let them
Yes,
cry
okay.
until they stop. So it's if a child cries, you're going to respond immediately to their needs. Baby wearing is a very large part of that. Being as close as you can to the child, especially during what they call the fourth trimester, which is like the first 3 months of the child's life
Mm,
out of the womb.
right.
Very much in close contact, co-sleeping doesn't have to be a part of it, but it can be.
Okay.
So, so you're very much in constant contact with your child. I baby wore my child to work with me.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that going on. So it was very much a part of that was a very huge part of my life.
Yeah.
While also having firearms be a very huge part of my life.
Wow. That will be
Um,
me, so
and
thank you for sharing that. Because I'm, like, very selfishly absorbing all this for when I do this, which hopefully will be in the next,
oh,
like,
great.
3 years or not the next year, but 3 years from now,
Mhm.
sorry, is when I that ideally would start, but who knows, you know?
Well, I am. If you have any questions, like
You
you have my
will
number.
get a
You
phone
you hit me
call.
up.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and so yeah, so that was a huge part of it. And what's funny is like some of the best, my favorite pictures from when my kids were little is like I'd have a picture of I'd be nursing my son
Mhm.
and he'd be playing with the grip of my gun.
Oh,
So like
okay.
that's how
Yeah.
incorporated I had both, and I nursed all of my children for 2 years
Mhm.
each. So if you do the timeline there was a period of almost 8 years where I was either pregnant or nursing,
Mhm.
but I was also training during that time as well.
Wow.
So, very much deeply involved in both worlds there. Um, so then eventually, I got national recognition for baby wearing and carrying.
Mhm.
And then, so at the time, John Johnston reached out to me and was like, "Hey, I see you have this baby wearing and carrying class. Have you ever thought about making it into a like tactics and like what to do in these situations. I said, Absolutely, I would love to, but I just don't have the resources to do it." And he said, "I have the resources. How about we team up? Let's make this happen." And we did. And baby wearing and care, the armed parent guardian became a thing. And I've been teaching that now for nearly 7 years.
Fantastic.
So, I actually just got done teaching one in Iowa last
Nice.
month.
Okay.
So, and it really is like, what do I do and what do I do if I'm in a violent encounter and my loved ones are present? And we go through little babies in arms all the way up to I'm with a fellow adult who
Mhm.
they're with me, but they're not helping me. You know what I mean? Like
Yes,
they're not an enemy, but I'm responsible for them, or at least I'm taking responsibility for
absolutely. I've
them.
had several
So, and
ex-boyfriends
we
like
hit
that. Just kidding. Sorry.
yeah.
Okay.
So we handle all the ages in between, like, hey, what do you do with a 2-year-old? What do you do with a 5-year-old? What do you do with a teen?
Mhm.
And we go through all those age and all the tips and tricks about what does violence look like when it's directed at an adult versus when it's directed at a child, because they are different. Um and and that's kind of what that whole class 2-day class,
Yeah.
and I think it's pretty good. I mean,
I
I'm a little biased, but I think it's pretty good.
Of course. I mean, it just shows, and first of all, you are one of the most articulate people I've ever met. You articulate so freaking well. You remind me of my mom. She's a lawyer. Arguing with her is hilarious. Just kidding. We don't really argue. We're besties. But I love that you do that. And I know it's shown through the way you've spoken about your trajectory and just your passion for it, that this is a one of a kind course. And I would like to take it, which I need to actually look at dates. I promise you, post Shotgun World Shoot, it's going to be a priority of mine because I want to be able to speak on this and help. And I've had so many DMs where I just kind of feel a little helpless. I'm like, oh, so I'm hoping at least for now I can send them to this episode and share your classes as a resource. And it's not your only job right now. You're balancing multiple, correct? Still. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive. Yeah. Oh my goodness. Incredible. So to clarify, you still teach both, right? So baby wearing and carrying, and then you teach the
I have not taught baby wearing and carrying in a long time because
Oh,
there
okay.
there wasn't as much. I could still speak to it,
Of
of
course.
course, but mostly that what I really wanna do is make that more of like an online class because it doesn't have to be in person. That would be kind of my goal for that one. But the one in Tap G is more popular because that's one that you actually shoot in, and everybody loves shooting
Of
classes.
course.
So
Yes.
that's the one that's far more popular. But I think, the key parts of baby wearing and carrying, and what inspired that one is I was invited to a baby wearing and carrying kind of like Facebook group,
Mhm.
and I saw a woman using a wrap, which a wrap is just basically a long uh, strip of material that you use to secure the child to you, and they're lovely, they're wonderful, they're very supportive. I have many of them, and I'm keeping them because I wanna wrap my grandbabies one
Of
day,
course.
but I digress. And she would just take her gun and put it in the wrap with the child,
Got you, got you,
and
got you.
she considered that
Mhm.
secure, and I was like,
I have chest pain. Yep. Okay, cool, cool, cool. I
yeah,
was hoping you
exactly.
were okay. I didn't know if you
Because she just didn't
She didn't know.
know,
Right.
like,
Yes.
and that's exactly the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. It's like when there's no information for women and everybody's scared of it and everyone just goes, "Well, just don't do it."
Mhm.
People are gonna find ways to do it, and they're gonna start out by doing it wrong, and they're gonna make mistakes, and in this arena, making mistakes means there's a high likelihood that somebody gets seriously, seriously injured or killed,
Yes.
and so we don't have as firearms instructors, I told Craig Douglas this, I said, "I think it's abysmal the way and just it's frankly somewhat negligent on our part as instructors to just dismiss parents' concerns about how do I do this safely, and we say things like, "Oh, just put it in your purse." And we don't consider what that means for little ones running around and getting in your purse and doing things like that. Or we say, "Well, just don't carry then." They're going to carry, and they're going to do it poorly, and there's a high likelihood that a child will get access to a firearm or injured or killed. Why are we just dismissing these issues? And I can get if that's just not your if you're a 56-year-old dude and you teach, basic pistol classes or whatever, and you're just like, I don't have any information. I don't have any, any knowledge about this. I get it. Like, I'm not trying to say that you should go out and get expertise in this if this is not your field. But I also don't think that we should just be dismissing it and saying, well, just don't do it. Because how does that work for every time we've ever told anyone not to do it?
Absolutely.
I think it's far more beneficial to say, this is how you do it. This is how you do it well. If you're going to do it, if you absolutely must do it, then, and these are the times that you don't do this, right? Like, okay, this is how you can do this, and this safely, but let's not do this. And here are the very, very articulate reasons why, so that you don't hurt yourself and you don't hurt your loved ones. So, that's kind of the bridge that I was trying to gap, or the gap that I was trying to bridge.
Yes.
There we go, for all of those years, and with that training, and that's what I'm still trying to do to this day.
Absolutely. I really wanna highlight what you said about, like, the consequences of not handling firearms well or just trying something. It's not like going out and trying a new hairstyle that you later look back at pictures and you're like, "Holy hell, I wish I'd never worn my hair that way." This is one with, deadly consequences. I really like that you give that the gravity it deserves. And then, I really related to the part about don't just tell someone not to do something. When I was earlier on in my, kind of journey of concealed carry education, which to call it that back then is scary. Okay. It was more like I was just an influencer. Now I'm actually really educating. um, I would just say only carry inside the waistband. And theoretically, yes, like if I could only ever own one holster setup, I was like told I could never, have another one. I would do IWB. Tactically, it's the most, efficient and like the chances of someone getting their hands on the firearm, as opposed to a bag, sure, like lower chances. But I didn't realize how much nuance there was to carrying a firearm every day. And honestly, I'll admit it here, it's because I wasn't carrying every day. I was carrying when it was convenient for me. And then I went through an experience with an actual stalker, and I was in fear of my life. And that kicked me in the butt to start carrying every day. And then I slowly became curious about fanny pack carry when Lena dropped her fanny pack. I had an abdominal injury one time. I couldn't carry inside the waistband comfortably without being in serious pain, and I started carrying with a fanny pack, and I had to think about all those times I told people very ignorantly, "Just don't do it." And those are people that I never offered a solution to, even if it didn't fit my lifestyle. So I really like that you're highlighting that, and um, I try to be a proponent of like have options to meet your lifestyle and kind of speaking in pros and cons as opposed to like everything being a black and white solution. I really appreciate that that's how you approach that, and it leaves a very good trail for people like me who are newer to educating and still trying to earn my seat at the table when it comes to kind of concealed carry education. So all of that to say thank you for sharing that. You said something earlier that I'm just really curious about, and I know it's deviating us a little bit, but we'll come back to this for sure. You said violence against adults and children are very different. Could you kind of tell me what you mean by that? This is pure curiosity. My brain's like hung up on it a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. And
Okay.
we go over this quite extensively in the Armed Parent Guardian, because it is very it how you deal with it tactically is very different as well.
Okay.
Because the vast majority of violence that happens, even with children present, is directed towards adults. Because the adults are the people that have the things that your average criminal wants, right? Your average criminal is usually trying to, when it comes to like violence, is usually wanting the keys, the money, the car. They want something from the adult. And that therefore whatever violence that is happening is being directed toward the adult. When the violence is being directed toward the adult, it's very, very unusual, and I've never seen it happen for that to be then redirected towards a child, because the child doesn't it's not the target. The child it's like the child doesn't exist. And on one hand, that's good, because it's unlikely that they're gonna suddenly, and the exception to this, of course, is if it's like a mass casualty incident where everybody is the target.
Sure.
That's an exception, right?
Okay.
I'm talking if there's a criminal that wants a specific thing, it's usually gonna be directed towards the adult. And when that violence is directed towards the adult, they're not gonna suddenly, turn and then be like, "Oh, now I can do something to this child." It just I've never seen it. It doesn't happen. The downside of that, though, is because it's like the child isn't there, they don't care. If they're punching, they will punch through the child. If they're shooting, they will shoot through the child. If they're kicking, hitting, it is literally as though the child is not there. You can use that to your advantage, but it can also be a significant disadvantage because they're not gonna pull their punches just because there's a kid there, right? And so the way that you can use that to your advantage is if you can get the child away from you, the target of the violence, very low likelihood that the child is going to be injured in that case. We go into all the specifics of like, is it reasonable to believe that you can get a child out of violence? And that's a whole conversation that we have in Tap G. Now, when violence is specifically directed to a child, those are very unique situations. They don't happen very often, thank goodness. But when they happen, they're often very violent and the outcome is not very good, right? We're talking your abductions. We're talking about, your mass casualty incidents. We're talking about things that, somebody is specifically directing significant violence towards a child. And when that happens, it's usually not because they want, something small. It's usually a pretty big thing and it doesn't go well for the child, right? And in that case, you are then as the protector, the one who has to interrupt that violence. And the downside of that is just like the violence can't be redirected from an adult very easily onto something else, violence cannot be redirected from a child very easily. And the only way, and I know this kind of sounds harsh, but the only way to redirect violence is to be more violent. You have to interrupt, you have to become a bigger problem than their ability to accomplish their mission, right? So if they are beating a child, just telling them to stop isn't going to work. Pulling on them isn't going to work. We have video after video after video of once somebody has started stabbing, and it's not necessarily a child, but a child or another adult, you're not just going to be able to pull them off. You're not just going to be they need to there's almost like a drive to complete whatever that very violent mission is. And unless you are significantly inhibiting their ability to do that, they're not going to redirect their violence. But once they do, now you have to contend with it, right? But then once there's a lull in that fight, they will go right back to what their initial target was. So, and imagine if that initial target was your 2-year-old, your 3-year-old, your
Yeah,
5-year-old.
right.
So and it's very sobering. Unfortunately, I mean, fortunately, it doesn't happen very often at all, but when it does, it's often very devastating, and the tactics you use are different.
Absolutely. First of all, I have major chills. Like, damn. Just because it's so true and it's like reality that we don't talk about enough. And I, I actually do think about this so much. Like, just kind of a little share corner. When it comes to okay, first of all, when it comes to selecting a partner, I've always viewed it I had a very, crazy childhood with parents in divorce, and I'm thankful for it. It showed me what I wanted to do differently as an adult. I got to view all of that in hindsight now. Therapy's amazing, moving on. Anytime I'm selecting a partner and, um, continuing to date someone and be intentional with someone, I see them through the lens of, like, how they would be as a father, in a lot of ways, and I think about kind of, will my partner be an asset, in a way? And I'm not talking about just self-defense. I'm talking about emotional, will they be a good emotional partner? Um, will they turn to the child and validate the child and provide that emotional reassurance that the kid needs for development? But it does come down to like, how we will operate together in public. And I talked to my now boyfriend, as part of the natural vetting process. I've asked questions like, how do you see, um, how do you feel like you'd be a protector in, a situation where you're alone with the kids? I'm not there with the gun. I'm actually the person that's trained him with a firearm, so I took him to ECQC. With all that said,
Oh my.
I know it was one of our we met at jujitsu, okay, so it was
Baptism
only
by
natural.
fire, my friend.
I know. I know. Craig had no idea until the 3rd day that that was his, 3rd time ever shooting a gun. So, we trained
Oh
him up a
my.
lot that we did tons of dry fire and very intentional live fire sessions. Moving on from all of that, um, I think about, like I think about pregnancy, and I know we're jumping around. Um, as this very vulnerable time where, like, if someone is attacking me and I'm the only one responding with a firearm, pregnancy or having a child in my arms, even thinking about it makes me want to shut my brain down and be like, well, I don't have to think about that right now. And
Mhm.
honestly, the only solution I've had before, this episode and talking with you in the past, and She Shield season 1, by the way, I will link that episode in the show notes. That was a great episode. Um, is to get like a Doberman and to train that Doberman up. Does this sound insane? Train the Doberman up and
No,
like,
no, it does not sound insane at
okay,
all because boy, oh boy, have I had the same thoughts.
okay, so can
Oh,
I
for
just tell
sure.
you my plan?
Especially
Go for it.
once I started getting into this more. Yeah,
Yes.
I'd love to hear it. But yeah,
Yes.
when I started researching this more and really diving into it, I remember once and watching I would search for video evidence of all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I remember once my husband was walking behind me and I happened to have one of the videos playing and he was furious, not at me,
Right.
but at the and he was just like, how can you stomach like
Right.
watching this? And it occurred to me like, wow, like I'm I'm getting really deep into this world that it is makes
Desensitizing.
me ill to think
Yeah.
about it. Yeah, and it was desensitizing, and there are times that I'd watch something and I'd just be like, "I need to go hug my kids. I need
Yes.
to go
Oh,
hug
I
my kids."
can't imagine.
Oh, yes, but yes, I wanna hear your
Yeah.
your your solution because boy, oh
Yes.
boy, have I thought of that myself.
Absolutely. I think the goal would be to, get a baby Doberman. And of course, like, for those of you listening that are like, "Why wouldn't you get an older one if someone needs a home?" Well, children and puppies are similar, I've
Mhm.
heard, and that if you wanna train them for protection, you need to start very early. I've spoken to a canine trainer, locally because I thought about it when I moved here alone to Utah, and he highly recommended training a Doberman from a puppy, not getting an older one that is already kinda stuck in his ways. So moving past that.
When you never know how an older dog is gonna handle a baby
Yes,
either.
absolutely.
Yeah, and so I agree there. I don't have dogs, I'm not a big dog person,
Yeah,
but I did work quite a bit with a dog trainer, and he never recommended introducing, an older dog to especially young children because it can go bad very quickly.
that makes
I know this
sense.
probably you're probably gonna get the comments
Yes.
a ton of
Yeah.
dog people are gonna be like, "Well, my dog was fi" Yeah,
Right, an N of
that's
1,
lovely,
though.
I'm so glad. But yeah, like from if we can do it right, let's do it right.
Absolutely, and especially because I would have this dog, of course, companions too, but for protection, and so I was thinking, get it, like, a year or 2 before we start even trying so that that time is spent to train the dog, take it to higher level training, and then I'd like to get a female Doberman. I've read so much on this, I don't even yeah, it's ridiculous how much I've read up on this. This is genuinely a plan of mine, by the way. Have a trained female Doberman because I love to go on runs, I love to go on walks, and that's not gonna stop when I'm pregnant. I have a pregnant friend who's
Yeah,
about to run a 5K for 4th of July, you know?
good
She's
for her,
22
yeah.
weeks in, like, it's one of those things, like, she's gonna do it, and that's gonna be me, like, we made a joke, like, if
I
I
took an extreme close quarters gunfighting class while I was still pregnant, so
Oh
yeah,
my gosh,
we know.
yes, exactly, so you get it, and girl, now I have to do that, thanks a lot, no, just kidding, I wanna have, you know, a distraction point, an initial point of contact that isn't me for, an unknown. Worst case scenario, they're someone that just kind of tipped off my dog, and then they walk away and everything's fine, but I really don't wanna be the frontline person and the first person. So I thought about dogs as protection, and it was a thought today before we hopped on. I was like, "Man, I really wanna ask her about that." And if you even
No, that is
recommend it.
that is something that I if you get it right. So I will say this. My brother-in-law is a dog handler. He's been a dog handler his entire or not military, his law enforcement career. And he's on his third dog now. And when he got his first dog, my sister was pregnant with their first child. And that was a concern that was brought up to to the handlers, the trainers and stuff was like, "Okay, this is gonna be our dog, but my wife is pregnant." And they were like, "Fantastic." They're like, "Bring her when the baby's born, bring" because the dog was still in training at the time.
Mhm.
So they're like, "Bring the baby down, bring her down." And they basically, even though he was the primary handler, they did train him with my sister and with their newborn baby so that he had the exact same protective instincts for my sister as well as for the baby.
Fantastic.
And they didn't do that for the other dogs, but for the first dog, this was the one that they really did a lot of work on making sure that, so well, my sister could not give him all of the commands, like she couldn't give him some of the other commands that my brother-in-law could. She could give him basic like attack, stay, she could give
Right.
him like the core commands, and he was very protective of her and very protective of their daughter, and, all until he passed from old age
Mm.
many years later, and, watching him and I mean, it's well known that dogs are a fantastic deterrent for average criminals, and having one that's well trained, that has good recall, that you can take with you on runs and walks, especially if you've got children with you, like, that I feel like is there's no better way to project into the world and into your space that like, "Hey, don't mess with this,"
Absolutely.
and I if that was something that I was more willing to take on, because of course, dogs, especially well-trained dogs like that, are an investment.
Oh,
They're an
yeah.
investment in time, they are an investment in training, they are definitely an investment in money. If you're looking at the price of if you don't know people who can either help you with training or, whatever, like, you're looking at a lot of money for a dog that's that well trained. But, if you can invest the time, the money, and the effort, I think that you got the jackpot for I mean, obviously there's places your dog will not be able to go,
Right.
like school, once your kid gets into school in some places. But I wanna see you do it. I wanna see you
Absolutely.
do it so I
Yes.
can live vicariously through
Oh
you
my
and be
gosh,
like,
yes.
"Heck yeah."
I would love that. I tried to train before we hop off this topic, I tried to train my sister's Doberman Australian Shepherd who is 6 years old. That did not work. I took him to a canine trainer in town and he was like, "This isn't gonna work." It's like, okay. He threw a ball for fetch and Shipley was like, like he didn't go.
Yeah, like, "What do you want me to
Just
do?"
yeah, exactly.
And
So
that's the thing too is, like, getting the right dog is, and the one that will respond well to training and all that kinda stuff, like, I've never been able to do it myself, but I've
right.
seen other people who have, and once if you get those, variables right, it is, by all accounts, amazing. One, just an amazing companion, an amazing bond that you have with a incredible working animal, but also there's peace of mind there,
Yeah.
that, I you get the little knock on the door at night and, knowing that if anything happens, I've got little fur missile here,
Yeah.
like, I'm all for it.
Absolutely. Yes, I love it. Okay, thank you for sharing your 2 cents on that, and for those that are listening who maybe can't have a dog, can't afford it, you know, you're already established in life and that's not gonna be an option for you, I'd love to kinda hop back to the concealed carry solutions. Where did we end off? Like, as far as I know it's not as simple as, like, progression through I know, sorry, my bad. Although I know if people are listening, they know what to expect, so thank you for being here, everyone, but when it comes through to concealed carrying kind of on that timeline, where should we kind of jump off from next?
Yeah, I mean, really, once you get into second, third trimester, you really can't wear anything around your waist just because you just don't have a waistband anymore.
Makes sense.
We kind of already talked about like
Mhm.
your hybrid carry and your also your I think fanny packs are fantastic. Same with afterwards, and you said something at the very beginning that, you know, your body does not bounce back. And the more children you have, the slower it bounces back after you have a child. And it's gonna be a while before you feel comfortable and really, take your time, let your body heal. Take and the other thing to consider too, sleep deprivation, um, pregnancy hormones. There are going to be times, especially if it is your first child, that you are tired, you're confused, maybe you're going through something like postpartum depression or something like that, that it might be the right call to just put firearms away for a little while.
Ooh,
And that is, being self-aware enough to know that, like, hey, right now, the best thing I can do for my family and as well as everybody else in my environment is to not carry right now. And maybe the best thing that I can do is not have firearms in my house. And I love that there has been initiative amongst firearms owners to kind of have a safety net with people around you that no questions asked. That if you said, "Hey, would you be willing to hang on to my guns for a week or two?" with no judgment, anything like that, someone says, "Absolutely. You let me know when you want me to, when you want to come pick them up. If there's anything that I can help you with, I'm here for you." I think having those conversations and being very open with each other, because if we can be a help and police our own in that way, then we're less worried about someone trying to come in from the government and take over that. But that takes one being very open about these kinds of things with each other and being willing to talk about them. And it takes being vulnerable and having conversations where maybe you do sit down with someone and say, "Hey, nothing's going on right now, but you're a good friend of mine. And should something like, if I go through a bout of depression or something happens with one of my kids, because that's the other thing that we haven't really talked about, but as your kids start getting older, they're going to be going through things. And maybe you have a kid who went through his first breakup and he's really angry and he's really hurt and he's, maybe saying some things that you go,
Yeah.
even if I lock all my guns up, even if I'm being a responsible gun owner, kids are problem solvers by nature, and maybe the best thing that can happen for my family right now is we don't have guns in the home for a little while until we have a handle on what's going on here. And I think that is part of responsible gun ownership is knowing when is the risk of having a gun and it being used in an inappropriate way greater than it should be right now. And what can I do responsibly to mitigate that risk? And the answer might be you don't have access to guns for a little bit, and that's okay. That doesn't make you a bad person. It just means that right now you're doing the most responsible thing.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I wouldn't have even thought to prompt you on that. So thank you for sharing that. I've heard of postpartum depression because I've had friends that have experienced it and opened up to me and kind of were, gave me this, preemptive warning of like, hey, this happens. Like my hormones took me for a ride and I didn't recognize myself and I like put a hole in the wall because I was just not myself, kind of thing, with their like hand,
Mhm.
like they hit the wall hard or something. Um, and I love that you're presenting this. This goes for anyone at any stage in their life. I've experienced, um, when I was married, my ex-husband looked for a firearm during one of our arguments, and that would have been a really good time for me to take the firearms out of the house. I had his firearm firing pin shaved down. That was what I did because that's all I knew to do at the time, was take his gun to someone who could professionally, use a is it a Dremel or a Dremel? What is it called?
Dremel, yeah,
Dremel,
Dremel.
dremelled it down. I thought I was doing the right thing. Looking back, there are more options. I kinda wish I'd involved his family and things like that, but, you never know when that's gonna be needed. So I'm really, really, really glad that you brought that up. Didn't think to do that today. And there are organizations, there's one called Hold My Guns. You can
Yes.
safely
Mhm.
hand your firearms over or just the pivotal part of a firearm, the barrel, for example, you could give them like the barrel and the spring, and then the firearm is, at that point inert. There are options like that around if you don't have someone you could trust with a firearm, or maybe someone who has a safe environment to take that in for you. So yeah, thank you. Gosh, such a good point. It kind of sounds like,
Well,
oh,
and
go
I
ahead.
turn Oh, go
No,
ahead.
no, no,
No,
no,
go
no,
ahead.
you. I was gonna kind of pivot a little bit, so I don't want to. Yeah,
Oh, and what I was gonna say, and the rest of the stuff, I mean, really, it sounds cliche, but it's kind of true. Like, let your body, guide you on this. If you're, like, say, if you're not feeling well, if you're not feeling comfortable, and the other thing too is a lot of women go through significant body changes after having children. They're not this. They don't return to the size they were before. Their body doesn't return to the same shape that they were before. Their breasts are not the same size they were. Everything is changing, and so your holsters might not be, your belts, your holsters, your Enigma, everything might need to change, and that doesn't have to all change overnight. Give yourself some time, be patient with yourself. And I think that sometimes I've said this many, many times before, but I always say, don't let the desire to protect your life keep you from living a life worth
I
protecting,
love that.
right? Don't be so concerned about making sure that you get this gun incorporated back into your life, that you forget that the purpose, you just added a new life into the world. You are now a new family. And of course, yes, you want to protect your child, and this is going to heavily depend on your circumstances for sure. But if you look at the statistics of crime, right? The vast majority of crime happens to young people who are single, because they're out there doing these things that get people in trouble. Once you've gotten married and once you're to the point where you're having kids, for the most part, this is not universal, but for the most part, your chances of being involved in significant crime, violent crime, go way down, and they just keep going down the older you get. Of course, that doesn't mean that, lightning can't strike, and I'm not trying to tell anybody, like, you don't have to worry about violent crime anymore. And if you do have a circumstance, you talked about, having a stalker. Like, if you have reasonable suspicion to believe that there is, or you live in a violent neighborhood, or any number of things that could raise that up, then yeah, you might take a little bit more energy to get things sorted more quickly. But if you don't have those factors going, you can look at your environment and say, "Hey, what should I be putting the most energy and effort into right now?" Starting out my parenting journey well and putting my thoughts and efforts into that and making sure that I, am bonding with this child and I am in a good mental space and all of those things, or should I be focused on this firearm and how I get this firearm, into my life? And I've seen so many times that it does become this, like, people are so obsessed with defending their families that they stop engaging with their families. I had a conversation with a guy who's like, "Well, when we go to the beach or when we go to the pool, it's my job to sit by the side of the pool with the gun and I overlook my family." It's like, but when do you get in the pool and play with your kids? Like, when do you be the parent that is actually engaged with their kid? And I'm not saying that I would never say that it's an excuse to get out of parenting,
Right.
but sometimes it feels that way,
Sure.
right? Like,
Yes, that makes a
you're
lot of
so
sense.
concerned about standing watch over your children that, what are your kids going to remember,
Mhm.
100, or I say 100 years, if I, well,
Sorry.
what are they going to remember when they're an adult? They're going to
Right.
remember that their dad never played with them. Their dad never engaged with them because he was out there and he was watching.
Mhm.
Now, if something happens, for sure, you're going to be like, haha, that was the moment. And you can do both. I promise you that you can do both. And there are ways to incorporate being vigilant and having a good defensive plan for your family and still be involved with your kids. And that's why one of the things we talk about in the on parent and guardian classes, your holster matters so much, because if you can't get down and play with your kids without the security of knowing that your gun is going to stay where it's at on your person, then that's not a good holster for you. Because you should be getting down there and playing with your kids. You should be running around with them on the playground. You should be jumping into the pool with them. You should be engaged with your children and still be able to, if you want to incorporate a firearm into your life, we are at a golden age of options available. And I guarantee you, if you are serious about it, you will find something that you can incorporate in all of those situations. But don't make it so much of a focus that you forget that your primary responsibility right now is raising a human being into a good person. And let's not put that aside just because you want to protect them.
I love that. That is I'm about to go home and see my family. This will air, after I even get back, so I'm not worried about sharing that, but, um, I I have a niece and nephew, and when we're out, my sisters always joke that, like, we have private security because I'm, like, always looking around. I have had to loosen up a little bit because I we truly do have such a safe neighborhood, but I'm every time I'm home, like, it would be when I'm home, like, it would be there's something about I don't know, I'm always like, "It's gonna happen." I don't know. And I think I just feel heightened because 'cause I'm now protecting more people than just myself. With that said, I've had to kind of think about that even as an auntie, like, being present with my kids and my nephew riding his little balance bike, and then also looking around for threats, and, we've had
Mhm.
some very suspicious behavior in the neighborhood before. I have 3 total times in the 10 plus years we've been there, and that's enough for me to just, like, always have a gun on me there. That doesn't change anything now, but with all that said, I've even experienced that a little bit as an aunt, so I can't imagine, how that would be as a mom. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and that's a perspective, again, I just don't have. It kinda sounds like, if you're lucky enough to start your concealment journey before you get pregnant, say you do get pregnant and then you're like, "Ah, I need something," that's okay too. Sounds like it's worth looking into that solution that you'll have to wear when it does become too uncomfortable, to appendix carry, for example, and trying to get
Mhm.
good at that maybe beforehand or early on when it's not so uncomfortable, maybe to move as much. And then just, yeah, checking in with those around you, staying on top of your mental emotional health. And there's no perfect solution, is kind of what I'm hearing here. It's very individual and it's very almost like community driven, is kind of what I'm hearing as well from you. And this is
It
so
can
good
be.
to
It
know.
can be.
Yeah.
Well, and I think honestly, if you because you are absolutely correct. I cannot tell you, I was really fortunate in that I started my concealed carry training journey and everything before I even had kids. Because I actually look back on it and I'm like, I didn't experience it the other way, but I've had so many people come to like Tap G as an example because they had kids. They weren't thinking about violence, they weren't thinking about anything like that. And then all of a sudden they have kids and then they're like, I'm responsible for this human being and I want so desperately to protect them. And so now I'm going to get a gun and now I'm going to, do all these things. And they're trying to figure out how to be that parent and they're trying to figure out all of gun classes and safety and all that stuff. And that is absolutely overwhelming. And so I was very fortunate that I was able to start that journey, and had a lot of that figured out before I even had children. And so, yeah, if you come late, and I'm not gonna say because you come when you come, right? It's
Right.
like, it's like I know you do jujitsu. It's like there is no, people like, oh, I came late to the game. No, you came when you came, right?
Yeah.
Like now you're here. Let's meet you where you are. There's no point in beating yourself up of oh, if I started this 5 years ago, but you didn't. You're here now.
Right.
So let's do with you what we can right now. Um, and if you're coming at this brand stinking new, I actually think that and maybe you've just found out you're pregnant, or maybe you just had, or or you just had a baby. Maybe, like you said, a hybrid carry might be the place to start. Don't worry about trying to get an IWB right now. Don't worry about trying to get an Enigma. Get something that is going to cover the vast majority of situations. Because let me tell you, if you are into baby wearing at all, trying to put an IWB underneath of like a baby carrier, it's not gonna work. You're never gonna get access to that thing. So something like a fanny pack or a hybrid carry method is going to be fantastic in those situations. And if there's that one thing that you can incorporate and it's going to be fairly universal, and once you get the draw stroke down and once you get some of those things down, you can use that fairly confidently for the majority of this really changing time in your life. Um, I would say go for that versus trying to, "Oh, now I'm gonna get this holster and this holster and this holster and that holder." Like, get one that's gonna cover a lot of these situations, and you're probably gonna be better off of it or better off with it. And then, I say this, we have a 5th rule for citizens defense rule research. We have the 4 main gun rules, but then we have a 5th rule, and that's keep your firearms inaccessible to unauthorized individuals. Because we teach what we teach, we get people who share us the videos of the kids that got guns and all that kind of stuff. So if you're gonna have a child and a gun in your home, you in this day and age, there's no reason not to have a quality safe. And they're not that expensive now, and they have quick access safes that you can get for relatively very, very, reasonable prices. So, I said it before, I'll say it again, children are natural problem solvers. I don't care. We've taught all of our kids about guns. They've all been to the range, they've all competed. I think, well, my youngest, I don't think has yet. But, like,
So cool.
even still, with all that knowledge and all that information, it's still up to us to be able to responsibly, be able to secure our firearms. Your car is not a holster. And, being able to secure your firearms against the natural curiosity of your children, I think is a bare minimum step when it comes to incorporating firearms into a household that has children. I wrote an entire article on how kids shoot themselves. And if you think that a child as young as 6 months can't pull a trigger or can't activate a slide, I got some video I could show you.
Whoa.
So,
Okay. I will link
yeah,
that in the show
it
notes. I'll make sure it's under the title. All those notes you guys see, I'll make sure that article is there.
and so yeah,
Gosh.
it does happen. So, I've done some experimenting with my own kids. My own kids, they're they're my lab rats.
I bet.
I've done so
Yeah.
much with them,
Well, they're the
and so
safest kids, out
they
there as
are
well because of
they're
the standards you've set. Yeah, absolutely.
they've got great sense of humor
Oh,
now.
I believe that 1,000%. I'd also so a theme I keep hearing from you, I wanna make sure or I highlight it here is like, um, there was no point in this entire podcast that you were like, "Oh, pregnant women don't get attacked," or like, "People with kids aren't targeted." Like, that was never said. I think because of that reason, when you have kids something I'm jumping around here, I obviously haven't thought about how to articulate this, not as well as you at least. Um, uh, David Hyman came on the other day, and we did these reaction videos, and in all of the videos, the attack on the person could have been stopped by just initially creating distance. That was, like, one of the recurring themes, and I made that the final thing. I didn't pick, like, a sexy gunfight for our last video. I made it about these 2 particular videos where these men enclosed space on these women in particular, and, uh, the women you can just see, like, in the face of the woman, like, they're kind of in shock that a man's talking to them that way to where they get encroached on, and Craig touches on this a lot. People talk their way into your space. So, if you haven't learned
Mhm.
how to use your voice as a tool, if you haven't learned how to move around someone, an unknown coming into your space, because there are reasons an unknown might need to come into your space. If, a dad has lost their kid and they're running up to you asking for help, but you can't really assess, whether or not they're a threat. There are situations like that too. So, learning how to move around and talk on the ask, tell, make spectrum is one of those valuable tools, but it's not as sexy as posting concealed carry and gun content. And so
Yep.
I always try in all of my YouTube videos where I talk about gun gear, I always say, but if you can't use your voice, then that gunfight of what you thought was going to be a full presentation is now in that like 0 to 3 foot range. And it's just a disgusting fight when you get to that. So I want to make sure those are my 2 cents because recently I've just been,
Yeah.
the more I come out with education, the more I'm like, it's like I can't find people talking about that first section enough, and so,
Mhm.
anyway.
Well, and I think it is important, like what you're saying. I don't think that pregnant women, because someone actually did ask me this in the last class that I taught, whether or not there was any evidence that I have found that women are disproportionately um, targeted for violence, and the data just doesn't show that.
Okay.
Not that I have found, anyways. Um, so now there is a higher risk to pregnant women. And let's just be honest, the number one person who is the biggest threat to a pregnant woman or any woman is her significant other.
Absolutely.
That's what the data shows.
Yeah,
So the person that you sleep next to every night and say I love you and have children with is statistically likely the most likely person to either try to kill you or injure you. That's just what the data shows. And that's a conversation that I've had with certain people too. Like, if what you're really talking about is defending yourself and defending your children, are you prepared for the possibility that that might be defending yourself from the father of your children or from the person that you have had your children with? And having that, like, because we like to think that, oh, it's going to be some stranger out there somewhere, and there are men out there who, when a woman gets pregnant, it changes how they think about her. It's now a competition for his resources, and I'm not saying that this is obviously not a good person,
right. Of
for
course.
sure, but that is a possibility out there. And, have you even thought about that? And what you were talking about, "Hey, when I'm talking about the people that I'm looking at dating, are they gonna be a good father? Are they gonna," like, those should be the conversations that you're having before you decide to have a child with someone. Because you don't want to have that person who's angry now that you're pregnant and is now eager for you to get rid of the child or trying to do something to, hurt you so that you might lose the child. That stuff does
It
happen. Now,
does.
it's
Oh,
disproportionate in the sense that, like, so women can be targeted because they're pregnant, but those types of people would probably that those types of relationship, that type of would probably be violent in other ways as well. So it's not because she's pregnant, it's because she has a partner that's a dirtbag. So,
absolutely.
so that being said, I don't see evidence that women are disproportionately targeted just because they become pregnant. The most dangerous demographic as a victim is still to be a young man. That's where, if you're a young man, that you're most likely to be a victim of violent crime, and you're also more likely to be a perpetrator of violent crime. Um, as you get older, men are still most likely to be victims of violent crime. Now, the crime that happens against women is disproportionately more, the outcome is worse,
Right.
right? Man gets hit in the face, he's like, maybe he's got, some bruises, whatever. Woman gets hit in the face, she's in the hospital with a broken jaw. So, same assault, same violent crime, but the outcome was far more drastic for the woman. So, yeah, the likelihood of you being involved in violence, not as high, but the results potentially more devastating for you, especially if you are pregnant, because now you're looking at not just yourself, but the life of your unborn child as well. So, and I would say, when you're dealing with things like you're changing body, all that kind of stuff, I think pepper spray is a fantastic thing to incorporate because you can get away with articulating using pepper spray way sooner than you could articulate using or even showing or displaying a firearm. And if you are pregnant and you're in that state of fragility, you have a even more of a articulable reason for why maybe you made some of the choices that you did. You were talking about navigating that space between, is this person, are they a threat? Are they not? And, moving in your space and talking to them and that kind of thing. If you're feeling uncomfortable, you can walk back pepper spray a lot easier than you can pulling a gun or displaying a gun. And you could probably even articulate pepper spraying somebody that was making you uncomfortable if you're pregnant, and feeling vulnerable than you could in other circumstances. I'm not saying that you should pepper spray people if you're
Right.
feeling it. You still need an articulable reason.
Yes.
But I would be a much bigger advocate for that than, like, especially if you're not super trained yet and you're like, I'm just getting into this. I think pepper spray is a great place to start.
Absolutely. I think it's Chuck Haggard that said it's the tool between a harsh word and a gunshot. I
Yes.
absolutely love
Yep.
that. And um, there are so many just badass dudes in the concealed carry space that also carry pepper spray. And I feel like that alone should be a testament to like their knowledge
Yeah.
of, you know, if I actually had to use my firearm kind of thing. Um,
Yeah, if you got black belts in, like, jujitsu who are like, "I don't wanna be rolling around with somebody.
yeah.
I'd much rather pepper spray." That's
Yes.
your clue. That's your
Yes,
clue
I
right
think
there.
of freaking Brian of ShivWorks. He's like, what, a 5th degree
Yeah.
black belt? Sorry if I misquoted you, Brian, but or maybe I think 3rd degree actually. Whatever degree above first, okay? And he carries the palm pepper spray clip unit in his pocket, and sometimes he'll carry it just straight up in his hand, and he talks about that. And this is a dude, I swear to God, if I saw him walking around, I'd be like, you can have my wallet. Like if he came up to me, I'd be like,
Yeah.
take anything you want. Like, no thanks. He has like muscles on muscles on muscles that are from, training like that. But yes, I appreciate you pointing out pepper spray. That's fantastic. I hope this episode has been surprising to listeners. I feel like maybe you jumped in listening and thought we were gonna share like, bag names and holster names and belt names and like drop a bunch of gear. I hope it's been more of a testament to like the full spectrum of violence and the spectrum of responding to violence. I hope that that's been pleasantly surprising. Um, I very selfishly, at some point, and we can do a part two, we can talk about this anytime. I'm so curious. I know I need to just come to your class and I absolutely will. And it's not, I don't feel pressured. It's been on my list. Um, I just keep taking on side quests like the freaking Shotgun World Shoot. What was I gonna say? When it comes to having to draw a firearm and having a baby like in a sling or having a toddler, I see so many videos of people. Um, training on the range, like dragging their kid behind them as they're engaging targets. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I actually have no idea what's right, other than what we've talked about in these few episodes. And so is that a thing that would be a good entirely second episode? Is that something you'd want to just touch on or bust some myths on? I just assume there's so much
Yeah.
nuance.
There is a lot there, and, like a good lawyer's answer, it depends,
Yeah.
and, yeah, you could do at least a solid half of an episode on just, and Craig Douglas, I have to do a big shout out to him because that was one of the problems that I brought to him, was I was just like, "Hey, I've got this situation where we wanna try and get rid of the kid, but we might not be able to get rid of the kid, and we've got some options for incorporating that, and like, how do we do this?" And Craig was like, "Do you want to drill?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want to drill." And he's like, "All right, get a pencil, write this down." So, yeah, so there is a lot there. And when it comes to, I will say this is what I can say. When it comes to having your loved we a lot of the training that we do in the firearm space is you, a target, somebody giving you commands, right? And it's very sterile, but it's very clear, and there's not a lot of extra stuff that's going on, right? It's just you, target, and the assumption. And even in ECQC, when they do added, like, okay, now you have your 2-on-1s or whatever, at no point, as far as I've never been to an ECQC, at least, where it was like, "Oh, and now also you have your 2-year-old next to you."
Right.
And now you're also, and your 3-year-old is over here, and your 12-year-old just ran that direction. What are you gonna do?
Right.
I will say this, with your loved ones present, there is no answer because there's so many variables that can go so many different ways. I would be a fool and remiss if I tried to sell anybody on the idea that there is an answer that can be accomplished every single time, because there's just too many variables there. Um, I can give you best practices, and I can give you some things to think about so that they're not new and they're not novel when you're trying to do them in the moment, and that's the best that I can give you, because it's kind of like muck, right? And I'm sure your audience knows about muck, right? Like, you got your principles, you got your best principles that you're gonna try and move through, but at any point in time, things can go left here, right there, and now you're just in it, and you've gotta figure things out, but you still have these guiding principles that you can use, right? And we do cover that quite a bit in Armed Parent. But basically, if at all possible, if you can get the child away from you and out of the fight, that's going to be the best practice, because we've already talked about it. If violence is directed at you, very unlikely that it's going to be redirected to the child. Is that going to be possible every time? No. Is there gonna be reasons that you might not even want to get the child away from you for a lot of different reasons? Yes, in which case they're in it. And there's not gonna be a good way to have them in it, right? There's a lot of bad ways that you could have them in it, but there's not a great way to have them in it. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yes.
So when I see videos of, like, other people, like, dragging kids or doing other things, or trying to simulate children, I take a lot of it with a grain of salt, but also I understand that they're trying to address a very, very, very complicated situation, and there are some things that I see that I go, that wouldn't be the direction I went with that." But, without, and I try to be very, very gracious too, because I know there's probably clips of my stuff out there that people go, "That's crap," and they don't have the full
Yes. Oh
context.
god.
Like,
Anytime
they
I
might
post
be seeing a
ECQC.
tiny little
Snippet.
section of
Yeah.
something that, if it was put in full context, they go, "Oh, okay, I totally
Right.
get it."
Right.
So if I see something, I'm very patient. I'm like, I'm
Oh,
gonna give
that.
them the benefit of the doubt here, because I might be seeing something that's taken wildly out of context.
Right.
There are some things I see that I'm like, no, there's no context in where
Right.
that's appropriate.
Right.
But other than that, I try to be very patient, because you're talking about a subject that's very, very complicated, and there's not a lot of good training and data out there for it.
That makes so much sense. That video I saw could have been from a situation where it wasn't appropriate to send the kid away. Like, that makes total sense. And, like,
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. I love that you very much just opened my mind a lot. Thank you so much for going into that. I know it's nuanced. It's hard. Gosh, it's so hard to, like, especially when you're so knowledgeable and you've, like, done all this scenario training and you've talked to so many different people and gotten all these questions to just like give an answer like that. But I love that you covered both sides of that and kind of almost the two extremes of like this is ideal, but like, worst case scenario also. So thank you. That makes a lot of sense. I've talked to just like a quick aside, before we end that, I have a sister. She's my older sister, but she's like Joel and I joke, she's the kindest one of the two of us. She did chase a guy down in Italy for stealing another woman's purse, got the purse back and returned it to the girl. So I'm not saying she's like not feisty. We all have that Cuban blood in us, but
Yeah.
she is the kindest. She's that person that like if someone came up, pointing at their phone, asking for help, she'd be like, "Come here, like, let me help you," And I'm like, "Hey man,
Mhm.
stop right there," right? Like I'm a little bit different there.
Yeah, yeah.
We were on a walk one day in this truck, and we're in that neighborhood I'm talking about that's super safe. This truck came, drove on the wrong side of the road. So I'm already like, the hell, stops in front of us and just stares. And I was like, what does one even do? Like I've never had a scenario training
Yeah.
like that. I'm over here with like two ECQCs under my belt, doing jujitsu my whole life and like being a USPSA, like all these things coming together in one. And I'm like, Jade, pull up 911. If anything happens, I need you to run. I was like, you will be a liability if you stay. And she was like, Sophia, like, what the hell? And I was like, it's okay. I was like, calm down. Everything's cool. When you're that one person in the scenario where you're like, you know better, you have to lead it. I was actually very calm. It wasn't until I got home that I was like, ah,
Uh-huh.
but we started to we like completely crossed the street. We walked like in someone's yard, like very close to their home. I just kept an eye on him the entire time. He watched us walk away. I don't know if he saw my like posture and that's what made him go away. He also like looked like he had been living out of his truck. There were like tons of like fast food things in his windshield and like very dirty truck. And my mom lives in a pretty nice neighborhood. So I was like, this is a little off. But I remember
Mhm.
telling her, I was like, I just need you to run because you're gonna get in the way. And if there is gunfire, like I had all these things going through my head, and all I knew to tell her was to go, and that was like my instinct. So it's kind of interesting to hear that that's actually like correct, I guess. Not to like pat myself on the back,
Yeah,
but
in some cases, absolutely, and in a
right.
case like that where you've got an adult who you're not worried that if you tell them to run, that you
Right.
run into traffic,
Yes,
like,
exactly. This is
you
my,
know,
20 or
um,
30-year-old sister.
yeah,
So
that absolutely could be
yeah,
the best option for you and for everybody, and
right.
because I agree, because like, if we can take away the distractions that we have to deal with, why wouldn't we? If we
Right.
can get it down to that it's me and the potential bad guy, and that's it, that's the only 2 things I'm gonna have to
Fantastic.
deal with, how awesome for
That makes
us,
sense.
because, yeah, but, like, and ideally, that would be fantastic. Is that always gonna be possible for us? Especially when we got little ones, like, no, and I think that's what frustrates me about training in general sometimes is that the men are out there, and I'm making a generalization, not all men, I'm
Totally
aware
fair.
of this,
Totally fair.
for sure.
Yes.
And the men are out there, "I wanna defend my family, I'm gonna go and take the classes, and I'm gonna learn all the things." Who's at home with your kids? It's if you're, ascribing to traditional gender norms, it's probably your wife, right? And you're like, "Well, I bought a gun for her, right? I bought a gun for her, it's at the house, she knows how to use it." Okay, does she know how to handle a situation with however many kids you have and have to deal with them? Like, I get it, you wanna defend your family, you're going to all the classes, you're getting all the training, and I think that's awesome for you. How about sending your wife to a tap G?
Yeah.
I mean, so that at very least, she's thinking about it because, Chris Seipert works, at CDR with me. One of the things that he says all the time that I love is that oh, shoot, I just forgot what he said.
I do
I'm,
that
like,
all the
building it up,
time.
and I'm like, "Oh my gosh,
I do
my
that
brain
all
just
the
went
time.
totally blank." I'm sorry, Chris, if you watch this. It'll come to me, I
Sending
swear.
your wife,
Um
sending the one who's
yeah,
home.
it's like if you're gonna be preparing for this, and that's great. I think it's fantastic that you're wanting to defend your family and all that kind of stuff. But like the person who's there and the person who's having to deal with these situations, oh, I remember what he says. It's it's not the plan that is the important part. It's the planning that
Mhm.
is the important part. Because what you're doing when you formulate a plan is you're thinking of all of the contingencies. What can happen? What if this doesn't happen? Or what if we start doing this and that fails and then we have to do this instead? And what if we start doing that and that fails? It is because, what's the saying? No plan survives first contact with the enemy. You
Mhm.
know, at least sending your wife to something like a tap G, she might not even carry a gun, right?
Right.
And we actually have a lot of people who come to at least day one who they don't carry a gun, they don't plan on carrying a gun, but the information they get about what violence looks like against adults versus against children, how to at least those kind of key principles that we were talking about, things to think about, at least it gets the ball rolling in, hey, we've never talked about what happens if you, the one who carries the gun, is all of a sudden in a situation that's violent and I am here with 3 kids.
Right.
What do we do?
Right.
And so the value in at least getting them into at least thinking about those things is that you're having conversations, and if the situation does happen, you at least it's not novel. You're not sitting there having to suddenly figure everything out in the moment, which is the absolute worst moment to have to be thinking about those things.
Mhm.
So, for those of you who are wondering, yes, we do split up TAPG into parts. You can come to just the lecture. There's a 4-hour lecture. The first day is 4 hours in lecture, and then it's 4 hours on the range. And then the day two is all the tactics and stuff that we go over. So
Fantastic.
we offer them separately. So if you just want to come to the 4-hour lecture, or your spouse just wants to come to the 4-hour lecture and doesn't want to do any of the shooting, they're welcome to do that. We've also had people just come for day one, or just like, I've never shot a gun before. It's not meant to be a first, it's not meant to be your very first class that you take with a firearm, but we've had lots of people who it was their first class and they were able to keep up just fine. So yeah, it's a little bit more difficult because not only is it a ton of information, but now you're dealing with a new skill for sure, but it is doable. It's not so difficult that that they can't keep up for the most part. But if you do have a high level of skill, we do find ways to make sure that it's challenging for those who have a high level of skill, so that they're tested both, kind of mentally, but also skill wise as well. So I enjoy teaching it. It's my favorite class to teach, not only because it's a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I actually had a student once. He was a psychiatrist, and he said to me on the beginning of day one, he goes, "Well, I can tell you had a very you didn't feel safe in your childhood." I was like, "What? Why?" He's like, "Because you've dedicated your entire adult life to teaching people how to protect their children." And I was like,
Yep.
"Oh, snap."
Uh-oh. Yep. No, I
So
get
yeah,
that. I get that.
you talked about like therapy and stuff. I was like,
Oh yeah. My
okay, I'm gonna
therapist
have to
said
go
the
back to my
the
hotel room and just like process this for a while.
a thousand
But
percent. Yeah.
it is a passion
Yes.
project of mine, and has been for nearly 20 years now.
I
So
love that.
yeah, I'm happy to have anybody who wants to learn about the topic.
Absolutely. Think I relate to that so hard. My therapist literally said to me last week, she was like, "But how fantastic that you turned." I rarely talk about like why I really got into martial arts as a kid. I don't go into that much, but if someone listens to every single episode, then maybe you've heard it on the podcast. But my therapist too was like, "But you've turned it into something fantastic. Like you've turned yourself into a resource." And I was like, "I know, Jennifer. Okay, I'm just kidding." But that leads me to what I want to say. Thank you so much for sharing that. For those listening, I will have all of your class information in the show notes, the notes below the podcast title. This episode or this podcast started to be a platform for bringing people like you to the front of like the resource line, and it started just because we talked about Craig. Craig was my first guest speaker. I don't know if I've ever told you that, which is terrifying. I refuse to go back and listen to the episode. I don't even want to know. It's gonna be so cringy. With all that said, I remember looking at his social media and Shivworks hadn't taken off. Brian hadn't taken it over. It was just kind of Craig running both pages, Salton Arc and Shivworks. And I remember being like, damn, I kind of found ECQC randomly. Like, what if I hadn't found it? Because it truly shaped the trajectory of my concealed carry journey and my, professional career in the space. And I wanted to
It's a
create.
life-changing experiencing for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely sounds like it has been for you. Like yeah, I love that so much. And he actually, I think, was one of the first people to tell me about you as well. So, with all that said, I appreciate you being a resource for this very niche topic. when we have, I don't know, countless families that need this training and have firearms in the home and, like, maybe have some misconceptions about, what it is to truly be a guardian. So, yeah, thank you so much, Melody, for taking your time. I know it's the end of your workday. I screwed up our start time today, so I was like, "Hello," and she was like, "We're not really supposed to be starting yet," and I was like, I totally had the wrong time on my calendar. So thank you for taking the time to come on post job. I'm sure you do want to get home to your family. I'd love to have you back on in the future. I'm sure we'll get many questions from this episode. I'm sure I'll later today I'll probably be like washing my hair and being like, shit, I forgot to ask her about, this. So we'll have to have more episodes and I cannot wait to train under you. I'm so excited. So thank you.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. Well, and thank you. This is
Oh yeah.
fantastic. I enjoy talking about the topic, but also I've spent some time with you, Sophia, and you're one of my favorite people to talk to, so
Thank
it makes it
you.
easy.
That means the world to me. Thank you so much. I recently came and trained at with Citizen Defense Research only for the one day. I
Mm.
I thought it was a revolver class, and I'm not gonna lie to you, I did like not show up with gear. So I had like my competition pistol in my bag, and I was like, Caleb, can I borrow a gun? So I like set up with a revolver. It was great. But I very
Oh,
much
you're in great company. If you come to a
yeah
CDR class and say, "I need a gun,"
yeah
you're gonna get like 18
Yeah,
guns just like
thrown at me.
thrown at
Yeah,
you.
it was fantastic. I love the way you all run a range. It was one of the safest ranges I've ever trained on. Felt super confident being there as a student, and I'd like to think I have a high standard at this point, especially training with Craig as my first instructor. So, all that to
Mhm.
say, thank you. This is awesome. Can't wait to post it. And yeah, thanks for listening, guys. Stay safe and stay vigilant.